So let's get this set up.
All right. Welcome, everybody. My name is Remo. I joined Adobe 1.5 years ago, and since then I'm working mainly on RD topics, together with Natalia and Julian most of the time. And this is Dominik. I think you know him pretty well from previous talks, but you may add some details.
Yeah, my name is Dominik Süß. I'm senior software engineer. The title is no longer really correct. I just shifted towards the site reliability engineering, just to take a bit care of the operational aspects as well. I was until June this year in the same team, so we were closely working on those topics, and that's when we came up with the ideas. Some of the stuff has been already presented that is close to be production ready, but there's some more stuff that has been worked on or at least experimented on that we would want to talk about. Next slide. So first of all, like, how do we do innovation within Adobe when there is like innovation that is not linked to a concrete idea that's already formulated? Like, how do we come up with new stuff? And one of the things that we do is we have garage weeks. Twice a year, at least for our org, we are getting basically a full week that we can work on whatever comes to our mind. We can build teams that are not bound to the teams that we typically work in. So we pull in, like, ideate ahead of the week and kind of look what we can do. And this kind of team effort that is being spun up there leads typically to generating some building blocks that lead into roadmap items that we would be working on later and productize and make sure that you can use it eventually. In the concrete case, our subject of the last, well, it's not the last, it's the last winter garage week, we had focus on debugging. And there was a question already around remote debugging. And we acknowledged this is something that is missing. Like, debugging locally works, but there are areas that are quite distinct from running in the cloud to running locally. So we have seen there is a need for that. So we had still some challenges to solve to get to that point. And together with some people from the cloud infrastructure team, we joined forces and built a fluid team to look into what we can achieve there. So this brings us to the idea that we have. Just go ahead. So the idea was not just to make sure that we get remote debugging, but become cloud native. So that means you don't even have to locally set up some SDK, some IDE, or something like that. It should be easy to set up, so spin it up within minutes, not within hours. And make it easily accessible and working on RDEs. So that's the idea of could you eventually be working fully on RDEs? Because one of the reasons why you probably currently don't see anyone fully working on RDEs is because exactly this kind of gap. You can't debug the stuff there with a remote debugger. So there is a reasonable, a big gap that we have to cover. And word in advance, like what we will be showing is pretty short because we were asked to kind of cut it down significantly. The reliable part, this is basically what we kind of cut out because this is kind of like the whole challenges that we had that we wanted to go into initially, we kind of cut out, but hopefully what we show you is pretty easy to understand and to use. Without going too much into the detail why it's so complicated to get it running. So, the whole procedure of the flow that we envisioned and that we mostly validated with minor chunks being mocked up to the point is that you start a code space with Visual Studio Code online and have a specific Adobe-provided development container running underneath that provides all the extra tooling that is necessary to connect towards the cloud instance. So that's basically the AIO client with some additional tooling to establish the connection and all the handshake stuff that needs to happen. Then you import your project in there, so you have it running in there. You start a debug session, and that's kind of an important part. Right now, RDEs are instances that everybody can access at the same time. But in case you want to debug, you want to have a really isolated session. You want to make sure that nobody else is accessing that. So the idea behind that is that we basically establish a connection. We kind of produce a lock where you have to have a token to get beyond that. So even for public access, web access, we can block it. And with that session, you have then an isolated access, can attach your debugger. That's then the MTLS session that needs to be, a connection that needs to be established. So there's a unique secured session established, and then you can attach a remote debugger as you are used to. And that brings us to the current state, like basically the demo part. So just advance what we have not implemented, because it's mostly a visual part, and have hard wired at that point is the topic of establishing this debug session. But this is something that you now hopefully contextually from a context understand and from the concept. And Remo can take over to run you through the current state.
All right, thank you, Dominik. Yeah, so here we have a short recording of how you basically start up the code spaces. So you go on the GitHub, start your code space up. This will launch a Visual Studio Code instance right in your browser, so no need to install anything. And it will start importing your project from GitHub automatically. Or we could, in the background, also access, with Bring Your Own Git, for example, additional repositories. So that's basically all you need to do to spin it up, right? So that's pretty easy going. Then when we once have imported your project, that usually takes a couple of minutes, we can see all the files. And in there, there's not just your files, there's also files from the container, where you now can see, for example, there's an image that we provide from Adobe, and there's also additional plugins from Visual Studio Code that gets preloaded by code spaces themselves. So you don't need to do anything there, but you could also add your own plugins that you need, and they get automatically installed throughout the code spaces. And then basically we just have your code in there. So here that's the well-known demo with the My Servlet. And we can open that code, we can see it there, and we can go on and debug later. So that's actually what we will do now. So first, to be able to debug, we need to create a secure connection to the RDE. And so far in our Garage Weeks, we have always done this manually, but we envision a command like the AIO plugin that we seen in the previous talk, that you can go on and start a debug session right within the container. Then you need to log in, you get your tokens, so you're also authorized. We know what you can do because of your user login, your organization that you're in, and so on, and we can securely spin up a connection. Once this is established, we basically start the debugging session. And here I first, before I start the video, I walk you through the steps really quick. So we can see an RDE, which is in the public URL. And I open the developer mode on Chrome to see what is going on. We first do a quick refresh of the site to see what's going on in the network. Then we start the debugging. We attach a session. We can see that it basically stops at the breakpoint, and then when I release the breakpoint, it continues in the developer tools. So that's the public URL. We're going to start it. We can see there's some traffic in the network. Okay, no big surprise there. So we have our code spaces, Visual Studio Code in the back. You can see it's also loaded on a URL. It's not installed. We're going to attach a remote debugger here. And oops, now it didn't work with the pause. Let's try again. So we attached debugger on the upper left corner there. You can see there's no stacks, nothing. And when we attach it, we have a red bar at the bottom that shows we have an active debugging connection opened. And it loads the stacks as well. So all the threads that are spun up, you can see them. You could also like pause them and step into those stacks. And off there we go. We open the source code, set the breakpoint, and then refresh the page. We can see that there the breakpoint is enabled. It stopped. There's no traffic in the DevTools. And once we release it, we can step over. We can inspect variables as normal as always. And then we can release it. And the page is fully loaded. In the end, always important, maybe would be a good idea to disconnect debugger once you're done, because the Codespaces container is active for quite a while, and if you don't disconnect, then somebody else goes on the page. It's just blocked. But that's just like things that we're going to work on then with prognostics and life readiness probes and all the kind of things that would be interesting in a later stage. Yeah, so that's it for now. I think we come now to a question that we have to you guys, which is how would you use remote debugging? What is there that you would need on top of that so that you really use it? Is it the only thing that prevents you to go full RDE? Is there other stuff that you need for cloud native development? So please file that into the adaptTo Live, and we are really happy to hear from you.
Yeah, I guess we can first, before going to the Q&A, I'll just like make a show of hands. Having that feature along with what was shared before, who would actively use that on the like day-to-day basis for debugging? Like, it's just could you envision working on that and primarily using that for debugging? Okay, some uncertainty, but like I guess that's roughly 30% that are carefully raising their hands. Okay, it's just like that's more important that we understand what is it that you would need for that to really help you and do that. And just because there was a question before where I just had this thought for giving kind of some guidance where to use RDE and where to use dev environments. RDEs have slightly different behavior on the non-functional side. So for all the functional testing, you can use RDE. When you want to have non-functional testing, response times, and so on, that's when you, in the first step, like the first integration environment is dev, and stages then for the full test, which has hardware that's the same as the same way set up as production. So just as rough guidance. And I guess that means we can go to the Q&A.
Hurry. Yeah, most voted question actually is there another IDE than VS Code possible to run?
So yeah, so we didn't get too much into that. Like this is kind of a showcase and a potential kind of flow that we envision, like how to go fully cloud native. But as we shared, this is a Docker container that's running under the hood. This Docker container is then public, so therefore it can be adapted and can be used to connect from anywhere. Like Codespaces run anywhere, so therefore you can also, if you locally run that Docker machine locally, and that essentially while we were testing that and debugging that before we got into Codespace, we were doing that locally, and you can basically use any kind of tool with that middleware to connect you towards.
Next thing is more not a question, like a comment or concern even. Costs is the problem right now. I would need 20 to 30 RDEs.
Right. So this is a problematic statement. In total cost, we can agree. Like right now, everybody needs to have a beefy machine to be able to locally run everything and to have the stuff running up. And this hardware is available to you, so therefore you use that one for doing that. But essentially, still, you are burning quite some time and money on setting up those machines. I know some partners are setting up quite complex flows on kind of like how to provision the IDE setup and SDK setups towards the machines just to be able to start faster. This setup is, as I said, like steered towards being set up in minutes. And that's one of the main points, to be able to start fast, to switch fast, and and this is something that you can't get locally, to be close to the cloud. And partially on RDEs, we can have certain features, certain integrations working in the cloud as they run in the cloud, which you can't locally. It's just not possible to have the setup completely working locally because you don't have the infrastructure around. RDEs have that. So there is eventually the need for that. There is still the case where you can have a hybrid scenario where you basically share an RDE and basically work with a feature around snapshots and so on, so to switch context so multiple developers can use that, and so that you, instead of completely working on that one, you basically use it to multiple times a week run your whole debugging sessions on that, and basically could even share resources.
Next one sounds like a wish. It would be so helpful if it will display the code vulnerabilities as per Adobe code scanning rules.
Right, this is something we could add. That is something, if we have this Docker container underneath, and if we start to kind of expose those rules, it would be not too hard to integrate that. Certain things I think can already, with the analyzers being integrated as of today, but for the Sonar stuff, yeah, that's something where we would have to look into how to integrate that into that container.
Thank you. Big applause for Dominik and Remo. Thank you for having me on stage.